Hi, this is Teddy, and you're listening to Jamie Brown Hantman on Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast podcast organization. Bye, y'all!
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and the other broad with me on today is Jamie Brown Hantman, who is the author of a new book, Heels in the Arena, Living Purple in a Red Blue Town. Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Kelly.
So I'm excited to talk to you today. I feel like there's a lot we could talk about here, but I'd love to start with just sort of a little bit of background for people, how you initially got into politics and, what sort of drove you.
That is, I have the classic Washington story to tell. Many people who come to Washington come first as an intern, and that was my path as well. I come from a family that was very interested in politics, but not politically connected in any way. So I had to, do this the old-fashioned way where I worked hard and tried to get the good grades so that I could apply for an internship and have a shot at getting it. So I actually was able to go to D.C. for the inauguration in 1989. And while I was there for that, and that was the first political event I'd ever attended in my life, and that in and of itself was a thrilling thing to see the peaceful transfer of power. And that day, the newly elected senator from the state that I was living in at the time, Florida, was having a reception to welcome people to the inauguration and to celebrate his swearing in as well that month. And that was Senator Connie Mack of Florida. So I had found out that this reception was happening. I didn't have an invitation, but nonetheless, I went into that crowded ballroom at a hotel near the Capitol and found the senator in a corner shaking hands and greeting constituents. And I went up with my heart beating, much faster than normal, and I went up, introduced myself, told him that I had applied for an internship and I was very much hoping to work for him that summer. And he said some nice, polite words, and that was the full exchange at the moment. I did end up getting an internship with him for that summer. I don't know that conversation really had anything to do with it. It probably did not, but taking that step and doing something that was very scary to me at the time gave me the confidence to do more, to try and get the internship and then do well with the internship. Once I got to DC, I would say that the key piece of advice for anybody who comes for an internship is that you're going to be doing work that is much lower than your skills and your capability. Everybody knows that. That's the drill and the joke with an internship. But the key is to show that you can do it with a good attitude and to show that you're the kind of person that they would want to work with on the staff. So I would just say, just grit and bear it. Don't give people a hard time and let them know how much smarter you are than having to, run and make some copies or run an errand for the office. And they will appreciate it, and it'll give you a leg up if you're trying to get a permanent job in DC.
That's great. I love those kind of stories. I actually got my current job many, many, many years ago. I started as a temp stuffing envelopes. So yeah,
awesome.
you just always say yes to those. I don't think stuffing envelopes is really a thing people do anymore, but back in the day.
Yes, and the things that I was doing as an intern, I don't think that those jobs exist anymore. When a senator would give a floor statement, you would have to physically cut a little piece of paper out of the congressional record and tape it up on paper and put it in a filing cabinet. And if they wanted, somebody on the legislative staff wanted a copy of a bill, you would have to go down in the elevator to the basement of the Dirksen Senate office building to a printing office and get a copy of a bill. So those are things that today's interns would be very amused by, but I'm sure there are equally tedious things that they can do in this information age, high-tech age that we live in.
Yeah, I'm sure. So the title of your book is Living Purple. So you're sort of really leaning into this idea that there can be a middle ground still in DC,
yes,
in this political environment, which I think feels increasingly difficult for a lot of people, including me sometimes. So why is that the sort of the way you decided to focus, and what has that meant to you, that bipartisanship meant to you?
Yes, and you're absolutely right that the messaging of this in some ways is sort of counterintuitive to the times that we're living in. And I would say I wrote it as much for myself as anybody, because I still need to work on applying some of these lessons and principles that I write about in the book. One of the reasons that I felt like I could write this story is because my personal life is very much what you would call a purple life. When I was working in government for people like Republican Senator Connie Mack, and then, a Republican administration, George W. Bush, I worked in the White House. I worked for Attorney General John Ashcroft. At that time that I was working for Ashcroft and President Bush, I was dating and am now married to a man who was working for Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, and then he was chief of staff to Senator Chuck Schumer. So we were, working, he for Democrats, me for Republicans, and not only that, we were working on the same issues diametrically opposed to each other. I was trying to get several Bush judicial nominees confirmed while he was doing everything he could to see that they were not confirmed. So it was very much, having to do your day job. And then when you see each other at the end of the day, you couldn't exactly, talk about what was going on. And you couldn't, go to dinner and complain about the other side because he was the other side. And that was actually a really great thing for our relationship because it forces you to focus on things other than politics, which in DC is an unusual thing to do in a relationship. It's sort of the bread and butter of this town. It's a company town, but we had to figure out other things that we could focus on for a lot of the time. And we would talk politics some, but not a ton. The other thing I'll say is that it also helped me professionally to be in a personal relationship with someone who had different views on how to solve policy problems, because it completely refined and sharpened my approach to what I was doing, because I was having dialogue with someone who also loved their country, but just had very different ideas about how best to help it and to help American citizens. And so the word compromise is viewed as a dirty word in so many places, certainly on a lot of cable news channels, but compromise is really a wonderful thing. That's how you can move forward and get people on board and actually accomplish something. And, we need to get away from this idea that compromise is just for wusses and realize that that's the way that you can actually get some really good public policy if each side has to give a little bit. So I found that it helped me professionally to not be in a silo with people who only agreed with me. And, we were able to figure out how to have a really wonderful personal relationship in the midst of some pretty profound disagreements on policy issues.
I feel like anecdotally, like things are getting worse, more partisan, like it's harder for people to reach across the aisle now and make legislation. Obviously, that's true in the Senate, that a lot of stuff just isn't going forward. But do you also have that sense? Do you think it's actually worse now, or we're just all paying a little bit more attention now?
It's absolutely worse. And I think part of that is people socialize even less with people on the other side of the aisle than they used to. This is going to sound parochial, but back in the good, quote unquote, good old days, people who worked for members of Congress and the members themselves used to do more travel together. So obviously in the course of sort of cleaning up some of the, gift issues that some people abused, it also did away with some of the things that helped people to build relationship. You don't have as much travel overseas together in a bipartisan way, and you don't have people socializing as much with people across the aisle. And if you're not talking to someone that you have a disagreement with, it's much easier to demonize them. And so I think that's part of what's going on. And obviously the way that some people just live online and, on Twitter, they feel like it's easier to be fairly nasty. If you were sitting across from the same person, probably 7 times out of 10, you wouldn't say the same thing, or people wouldn't say the same thing that they are typing with some anonymity and some degree of separation. At some point, it's got to change, and I don't know if we're just going to hit a point of rock bottom. But I also, as bad as it's getting, when little things happen, like President Bush gives Michelle Obama a throat lozenge, people all get a little bit excited about this, moment of kindness between an R and a D. And the fact that people focus on something so simple and human like that to such a large degree at the time that it happened, to me, shows me that I think many people who are not necessarily the loudest ones on Twitter, et cetera, are craving more civility and some more kindness towards their fellow humans. So I hope there's more of that. And one of the reasons that I wrote this book is I want to encourage people to try and, do this themselves and give them some tools, and try and encourage people that we can still figure out the answers to some of these things in politics without viewing it as a blood sport.
I mean, would you recommend we all go marry someone from the opposite political persuasion?
That's probably not feasible. But people should be open to the idea of making friends with people that are on the other side of the aisle, trying to engage with them and have a conversation, find out, why they feel the way they do, why they voted for the person they voted for. It'll help us to learn a little more about where they're coming from, and that it can actually benefit people as they advocate for their own positions, because you learn more about sort of what the potential weaknesses of your arguments are. It helps you to learn what another person's perspective is, and it can make your arguments better. And the other thing to keep in mind is that facts and logic don't tend to be the things that change people's hearts and minds. People tend to move their position on things and change their minds when they're presented with a point of view from someone that they have a relationship with. So it's about the person who is talking to them as opposed to the facts that person is saying. And so if you can take the time to develop some kind of relationship with another human being, you're going to be in a much better position to sort of impact the way that they would view, if you wanted to take an issue like immigration. So what I've done in my life is not going to be possible for everyone, but I wouldn't close your mind off to that possibility.
I wanted to ask too about raising kids. So this is a thing I think a lot about. I have 2 sons. They're 8 and 5, and we talk politics with them a lot, but they're getting a fairly one-sided view of things. But you have a daughter, and does she sort of do you talk about politics? How do you raise a child in a sort of it seems so funny to ask, but in a bipartisan household, what does that kind of look like? And I feel like that would be much healthier, but I don't know exactly how to model that in with my sons when they're being raised by 2 Democrats.
The funny thing is, our daughter, even though my husband and I obviously have backgrounds of being involved in politics, she seems much more interested in science and math, and I think would much prefer to grow up and be in outer space. So basically what we're trying to do is to focus on, values, kindness, fairness, things that should matter regardless of where she ends up on the political spectrum. And we really want her to think for herself. She goes to a school that's fairly progressive. And, to me, the most important thing is that she be an independent thinker and that she want to focus on making the world a better place and, let her find her way. I think by the time she is old enough to vote, we're going to be looking at probably a very different political landscape, in terms of certainly what the Republican Party is, if it's in existence at that point. Some people sort of question how things are going. And so I think we're focused, more on values, and, that obviously is going to skew one direction over the other in this day and age. And, we're not afraid to talk to her sort of fairly frankly about, things that we are troubled by that the president has done. And, she hears that in school. But, we do it in a way where we're still giving her the room to sort of, learn things for herself at sort of an age appropriate level, which is, different for every kid. It's challenging to translate some of these things for the age. But I think these kids pick up on a lot of what's going on. So it's interesting to sort of get their impression of things, even at the age that our kids are.
Yeah. So we were focusing some on the subtitle of your book, but I want to talk too about the title. So it's called Heels in the Arena. And, you have a story about when you were giving a presentation and it ended up being sort of more Legally Blonde in tone. So I'm wondering, I think a lot of us women who want to be involved in politics or want to succeed in our jobs often worry about being too girly or leaning into that side of things. So I'm wondering how you have struck that balance in your career and, what it means to you to be a powerful woman, but still clearly be a woman.
It is one of the key challenges that I've faced. And I can't say that I've done everything the right way. There are things that I've done along the way that, looking back, I might have done differently, but that's part of learning and growth. I don't think I did anything that hurt me too badly, because I think I did pretty well going from one thing to the next and was able to accomplish some things that I feel pretty good about. You mentioned, the speech that I gave. When I first got to DOJ, I was given a promotion fairly quickly, and I was running legislative affairs for the whole department, having been there for only 4 months. And I was asked to give a presentation to the leadership of the department. So it was the top 30 leaders of DOJ, and that included people like John Ashcroft and Robert Mueller and Ted Olson, and these people that I had been watching on the news, after 9/11. And then I was asked to give a talk to them about how Ledge Affairs would help them, manage relationships with the Hill. That was a fairly intimidating scenario, given that I was fairly new, and these were people that, were clearly powerhouses in their own way. My approach to it was to try and give a talk that was unique and something that only I could give. And the way I structured it, I wouldn't do it that way today because the world has changed in 15 years. But at the time, I decided that I would talk to them about how to manage the Hill in, very sort of female ways. And so I talked about the Hill in terms of bad boyfriends, talking about, bad staff to deal with, makeovers, because the composition was changing, the majority was changing from D to R, and cat fights of all things. So, I mean, I look back now 15 years later, I was like, oh, no, I would not do that today. At the time, a little different then. But I will tell you that my colleagues loved the talk, and I got amazing feedback from so many people who were sitting in that room. And it was because I presented it as me, and I didn't try and make myself something that I wasn't. I wasn't a hardcore law enforcement person. I didn't have that background. And so I decided I needed to be true to myself and to try and create it, present it in a unique way. But, those are things that each woman has to. I think the most important thing is to not compromise who you are. Some women are, much more. But I hate using stereotypes, but if you look at a continuum, there are going to be some women who are, they would describe themselves as much more girly. They love their shopping. They love baking, or they, are really into just being with their girlfriends and maybe dress in a very, very feminine style. You're going to have other women who would say, get me far away from that mall. I don't care. I don't have time. I'm focused on, reading, the latest issue of National Affairs. And obviously you can be all of those things, but you just, you've got different personality types. And I would say you need to be who you are. Don't try and be the hardcore powerhouse if you're someone who feels like you're more of a nurturer by nature. And if you're a powerhouse, you don't try and be what you think people want you to be. You need to be yourself. There's lots of little things too that I think, people can have vigorous debates about. And one that pops out in my mind is the idea of baking for the office. I am my mom was a huge baker. She made great desserts. And I got that from her, and I love to bake, but I don't want to keep it at home and eat it all because that becomes a problem. And so the idea of baking chocolate chip cookies or scones or something for the office is something that I loved to do, and I would try and do it when I had time and bring it in, even if I was the boss. And I remember riding to the Hill with one of my DOJ colleagues who was at the same level in the department, and when not about me, but I mentioned the concept of, somebody bringing baked goods into the office, and she jumped on that. You don't bake for your colleagues. You don't do that as a woman. It's going to diminish you. Absolutely not. That is a huge mistake. And she felt so strongly about it. And, I think she has a point as well, but doesn't mean I'm not going to, but, I think those are things that every woman, long and short of it, I know this was a long answer, you have to decide for yourself, and you need to be true to yourself, because if you're trying to shove yourself into a box that you think you're supposed to be, you're going to be miserable. And this needs to be about, being a person in the workplace who is true to yourself, first and foremost.
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating seeing so many women running for president this time, that they've been able to be different kinds of women while running, in a way that when there's just one woman up on that stage, they can't do that. I think it's been really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we'll see that more as more women, not just in elected office, but, rise the ranks in appointed offices, and, that we'll see that kind of thing as well, I hope.
Right. No, and I think, when there was very few, they felt like they needed to be a certain thing because there were so few of them. And now as the numbers are increasing, I think you are seeing women deciding that they're going to be who they are. And you're right. And these presidential candidates, it is fun to watch. And I think that, especially the main ones who seem to be sort of distinguishing themselves and polling, pretty decently, are doing a really great job at being who they are and showing a human side. And even they are getting, people are analyzing things like when Kamala Harris went shopping and let the cameras follow along. I think it was great because that's what women do. That's what men do. And she was just showing a human moment. So I love it. I think it's really fascinating.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about?
I would say I wrote this book primarily because I want to encourage people who are interested in having an impact on what's going on in our country. I want them to step into the arena. Hence the name and the title of the book. There's a lot to be frustrated about right now, but if people who have the right values and the right motivation don't get into the arena, then it's going to be filled with people who are doing things for the wrong reasons. There are a lot of good people in Washington, even though the headlines seem to be filled with people who are not doing the right thing. And I just would encourage, people who are listening, who are thinking, that it's sort of hopeless and there's no point, that is absolutely not true. We need people of quality to get engaged in their local level, and their state level, and at the federal level. It's our country, and there's a lot that can be done. And so my book provides advice on how to do it and how to do it for the right reasons. I did, provide a lot of stories about my experiences in a way that I hope will make it an entertaining book. I didn't want it to be sort of a dry manual, so I did try and keep things a little bit light. So it's not a typical sort of highfalutin, serious Washington memoir. It's got some entertaining material in it. So I would just encourage people to engage because your voice matters.
Excellent. And where can people find the book?
So you can find it Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There are independent booksellers as well. So if you go to Goodreads, there are links. If you go to, it's listed on Amazon. And I also have an author webpage, jamiehantman.com, and that'll take you to a link to purchase as well.
All right. Excellent. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today. I will say we haven't had a whole lot of Republicans on the podcast in the past, but it's always fun, and obviously a lot of the stories and advice that you have, are just as relevant for Democrats and Republicans. And I think we're all very interested in how we can move forward in a more bipartisan environment.
100%. And that was the goal, was to write a book for everyone. There's nothing in the book trying to convince people of one policy idea or another. It's just advice that translates no matter where you are in the political spectrum. So I really appreciate being able to come on and to have this conversation. And I appreciate the work that you're doing to get more people involved. It's really important.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.